The thing that we're about to discuss is called the Nutraloaf, and no one who's eating it is walking on air.
Ooh, it sounds gross.
That's right. So if you didn't know this, in America, we have a very significant portion of our population incarcerated, significantly higher than anywhere else in the world.
Locked up,
we're having a bad time. And our prison system over the last couple of decades has slowly turned from a allegedly corrections and rehabilitation system into a machine, right?
It's called the prison industrial complex.
Right, and a lot of people are getting very rich over the fact that we take people with lower IQs who are poor and minorities and we just put them in jail. And then people make money taking care of them, which comes from our tax dollars, creating a really screwed up situation. Now,
it cost us billions of taxpayer dollars a year.
So a lot of times people forget that there are in fact human beings who are in jail. And listen, these are people that have committed crimes and they're in there to be punished. I'm not, saying we shouldn't punish people for crimes at all, but I am saying that, there is a thing called human rights violations. And one of the most egregious things, I actually saw this on a documentary a couple months ago, detailing the state prisons in Virginia. And I know that they do this in other states, but I saw this in Virginia. One of the ways that they feed their inmates, especially inmates in solitary confinement, is this food item called the Nutraloaf. Now, what the Nutraloaf is insanely revolting. It's basically this brown brick that they provide to inmates. And what it is supposed to be is all of the nutrients that they need in a day to sustain themselves. It is about 1,100 calories, and in some places it's given to inmates as punishment for inmates that misbehave. So what goes into the Nutraloaf, in case you were wondering? You have a combination of all of this stuff mixed into a brown mush. Bread, cheese, carrots, spinach, raisins, beans, vegetable oil, tomato paste, milk, and potato flakes. Now, the people that eat this Nutraloaf describe it as cruel and unusual punishment. You're basically asking people to consume the equivalent of like a bread brick, right? They say it tastes disgusting, you can barely get it down because it's so hard, and this is what they're feeding to inmates all across the country. Now, Richard, talk to me about your obviously visceral reaction to the Nutraloaf.
I have so much, I'm taking my glasses off.
Take it off.
I didn't know it was coming. At some point, Einstein says, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. We as a country we entered insanity maybe I would argue in the mid-1980s when we started this stupid war on drugs. Right. Right? Where we started locking people up for having a pebble of a drug for 20 years, for 30 years. Or then it was Bill Clinton and the 3 strikes, you're out. Instead of saying we're going to help these people, we're, strike, 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 you're out. 10, 20, life. All these cutesy sayings that these PR companies created that penalize people. And what makes us so sick and so disgusting to me is that right here in the United States, right here in our nation's capital, right on 14th Street, blocks away from the White House, we have the Holocaust Museum where we say we'll never forget the lives of the 6 million people who died for no reason because of hatred and bigotry and discrimination. Well, I would argue that we have forgotten because what we're doing here in America in our prisons and in this school to prison pipeline and in this mass incarceration system is the same thing. We're using hatred, bigotry, discrimination to lock people up indiscriminately for long periods of time, right? And you think about some of the crimes, and I'll be very honest and open about it. I have family members that are locked up. Mm-hmm. Did they make a mistake? Absolutely, right? But when you make a mistake at 15, 16, 17, does that warrant 20 years in jail eating Nutraloaf? Right. Absolutely not. How, as we cannot, and I mean, here's the thing, we know our model doesn't work because other developed countries have found other models that are way more effective. Sweden and Norway are perfect examples where their percentage of people who go into prison
and then return to prison after is insanely low. There is a model that actually works where people go in and are rehabilitated and go on to live successful lives.
But what ends up happening here is what people don't understand. Like, well, why would you go back when you come out of prison? Because you go back on the streets, right? And there's no opportunity. Sure. There's nothing there for you. I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine yesterday, and he was talking about his brother who lives in Chicago, and how his brother, his brother was driving on the west side of Chicago, and they shot him, like some gangbangers shot into the car. His brother was fine, but his brother's friend died in his arms. And he was like, we've got to do something. And I said, we've got to do something, but we can't just depend upon law enforcement and locking people up as a solution. Because number one, that doesn't solve the problem, because the moment they get back out of jail, there's nothing else for them to go back to because they haven't been rehabilitated. And number two, the reason why that doesn't work is because how can you, when law enforcement, not all police are racist, but the system is systematically set up to imprison black and brown people at an alarming rate, sure. Right? So how can you say to, little Jerome or little Julio or little Juan or little Malcolm that you need to call the cops when you see something bad happen, when the day before, little Jerome, little Malcolm, or little Julio's brother was accosted by that same police officer? Like, how can you pick up the phone and then call them and be like, well, come help me now, when you were
stopping and frisk,
when you were stopping and frisking my brother the day before, right? So we live in this, we've created a sick cycle, right? And nobody wants to deal with it, and everybody has chosen to double down on, and now we're in a situation, no, we're not supposed to be talking about the president in this segment, but we're in a situation where Jeff Sessions, who is a buffoon, right, as our Attorney General, and Donald Trump as his co-conspirator, have decided that they're going to double down on stupid-ass policies expecting a different result.
Right.
Exactly how I started my rant. You cannot repeat the same thing. Repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. Don't go after MS-13. Right? Like, go after the people who are addicted to drugs. If we can solve drug addiction, the gangsters won't be able to sell the drugs. Right? If you want to solve gun violence, then let's get the guns out of the hands of the people committing the violence. Period. So, I mean, and that's a part of the problem, that we live in this counterintuitive world.
Right.
Right? And where people will take no blame for their actions. The Fraternal Order of the Police refuse to admit that they do anything wrong. They refuse to admit that they profile people. And every time you have all these cases of black men dying unarmed, they're like, oh, that was just one instance. Sure. That was just one. You can't look at that. That's an outlier. That's an outlier. No, it's not an outlier when in the city of New York, when stop and frisk was the law, 120% of black people got stopped. That's over 100% of people who got stopped were African Americans. Because you know what that means? They're stopping the same people over and over and over again and expecting a different result. America. This Nutraloaf is part of a larger systematic problem created after slavery, right? Where we basically, the 14th Amendment, while it does say slavery is illegal, it talks about, well, if you commit a crime, that doesn't apply to you. So we have now created an under system of slavery that continues to reap bad results in our society. And that society, and then what it's done, Rich, is it's seeped into different parts of our society that we don't want it to seep into. We're trying to figure out why the hell it's happening. It's like when you pollute water, right? It's like, it really is like bed bugs. So what happens in bed bugs, anybody who knows about bed bugs knows, like, so maybe the prison, like, oh, we have all these bad people, we have all these bad bugs, we're going to put them in, we're just going to seal off this one apartment. But bed bugs move through items and move through things, and the concepts move, and next thing you know, the apartment next door has it. Next thing you know, the whole block is infested. So what has happened is, as we thought we'd create these prisons, lock these bad guys, men and women up, and we'll be fine, we can seclude them from society. But that same type of behavior has now seeped its way into our classrooms. So you have this, zero tolerance discipline. I just left San Francisco, Daly City, and a teacher was there. We went on a site visit, and a teacher talked about what it felt like to see a 5-year-old student get handcuffed, and for the police officer to refer to the student as a perpetrator. What part of a 5-year-old could be a perpetrator? Now take out, for the police officer, it doesn't matter, because this is a 40-year-old, 50-year-old police officer who locked this kid up or handcuffed him. But think about that 5-year-old child. Think about the impact that the impact of his classmates and his school community. We're supposed to be a safe, loving, and thriving environment, right? Seeing him being locked and shackled like a slave crossing the Middle Passage, shackled at 5 years old. What's the mental impact that it would have on that child? Just think about it.
Yeah, it's bad.
And then but before you know it, he becomes part of this prison industrial complex. America, we have got to do better. We really have got to do better.